There was once a technique, it needed no wires, no machines, no pills, only breath, focus, and discipline. A method to open the gates of the mind not by force, but by stillness. It began spreading quietly, as truth often does. Those who practiced it reported clarity, speed, intuition. They remembered not just information, but connections. They could see patterns in chaos. They could think not faster, but deeper. But soon, it vanished. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. The human mind, in its dormant state, is like a blade left to rust in the shadows of a forgotten forge. Not because it lacks the capacity to shine, but because it was never taken to the fire. Most live their entire lives with the blade still sheathed, unaware of its edge, never testing its weight, never sensing its power. It is not that the tool is missing, it is that the will to sharpen it has been dulled by comfort, distraction, and fear. Yet once the sheath is removed, once the mind is freed from its bindings, of belief, of habit, of noise, something begins to stir, a clarity, not born of knowledge but of space, a stillness not empty but full. The unshackled mind does not seek chaos, it seeks precision. Like a blade guided by an unseen hand, it moves through illusion with ease. It no longer hacks at problems, it slices through them. But the sharper the blade, the more care must be taken in how it is held. Power, once awakened, is not neutral. It is not passive. A sharp blade in the hands of the untrained is more dangerous than no blade at all. It cuts not only outward, but inward. It turns on its wielder. The same mind that can perceive truth with unerring accuracy can also fall prey to arrogance, isolation, and confusion if not anchored in humility and discipline. There are those who sought this mental edge and found it, and in finding it, lost their balance. They used it not to liberate themselves, but to elevate themselves above others, to conquer, manipulate, outperform. But a sword raised only to dominate is destined to rust in the blood of its own making. When the mind becomes sharp, it must be tempered not just by intelligence but by wisdom, not just by speed but by stillness, not just by desire but by purpose. And this is why not all are ready, because to wield the sharpened mind is to take full responsibility for its consequences. A dull mind can blame the world. A sharp mind must blame itself. There is no refuge in ignorance once clarity has entered. You cannot pretend not to see. You cannot unknow. And with that knowing comes weight. The weight of choice. The weight of seeing the path and still having to walk it. To unshackle the mind is to remove every excuse, every illusion, every lie we tell ourselves to stay comfortable. And this is why many prefer the dull blade. Because with dullness comes safety. You cannot wound yourself with what does not cut. You cannot awaken in a world where sleep is rewarded and awakening is punished. Those who seek to control others fear the sharp mind, not because it is violent, but because it is free. Because it questions the rules of the game, instead of merely playing better. Because it sees beyond the surface. The blade of the mind reveals the puppet strings, not just in others, but in the self. It begins with questions like, why do I think this? Where did this belief come from? Who benefits from my confusion? And from those questions, walls begin to crumble. The training of such a mind is not glamorous. It is not a flash of lightning. It is the quiet grind of discipline, the repeated drawing of the blade across the whetstone of experience. Each day, every breath, a thought arises, it is examined. An emotion stirs, it is welcomed, not indulged. A reaction tempts, it is held in awareness until it passes. Slowly the mind begins to cut through the noise. It becomes a blade, yes. But more than that, it becomes a mirror. Because the sharpest blade is not the one that cuts the world. It is the one that cuts through illusion. And when that blade turns inward, it does not destroy, it reveals. What remains is not emptiness. What remains is essence. What remains is the person who has always been there, hidden behind layers of conditioning, fear, and forgetting. Not all are ready to wield this mind, because not all are willing to let go of the comfort that dullness brings. The unshackled mind does not make life easier, it makes life clearer. And clarity is not always kind, but for those who endure its light, it brings a freedom that no system, no authority, no fear can take away. There is something ancient in the human heart that responds to the forbidden, not with rebellion, but with recognition. We do not chase the flame because it is dangerous. We chase it because we remember it, because something in its light reminds us of who we were before forgetting became the norm. What is forbidden often carries the scent of truth, not the kind printed in books or spoken from stages, but the kind that cannot be contained, because it lives in silence, in the breath between thoughts, in the feeling that arises when something clicks deep within, and you do not know how, only that it has always been there. And yet, why would truth need to be forbidden? The answer lies not in the truth itself, but in what that truth does to the structure around it. There are methods of learning that do not just inform the mind, they transform it. They do not feed the intellect, they wake the being. They do not give answers, they unmask the questioner. Such methods are not dangerous because they cause harm. They are dangerous because they dismantle illusion. And illusion, when it is profitable, defended, or passed down as tradition, does not die quietly. When a technique is banned, one must ask not only, what did it teach, but rather who would lose their hold if people learned it. This is where fear enters. Not your fear, theirs. The fear of those who have built towers on top of ignorance. The fear of those who govern not through wisdom, but through the fog of dependency. For when a person no longer needs the system to grow, the system must either evolve or suppress. Many so-called dangerous teachings did not teach people how to conquer others. They taught people how to conquer themselves. And a person who has mastered the inner world cannot be manipulated by the outer one. They become ungovernable not because they resist, but because they transcend. Think of fire. A child is told not to touch it. They obey, at first out of fear. But one day they are drawn not by rebellion but by curiosity. They reach out and it burns. And in that moment, they learn something no warning could ever teach. The lesson enters not through words, but through experience, and though it hurt, it also taught. It marked the beginning of wisdom, so it is with forbidden knowledge. It burns away the false comfort of second-hand understanding. It ignites the raw flame of first-hand knowing. But there is a danger. Some chase the forbidden out of pride, out of ego, out of the desire to be special, to possess what others cannot, and in doing so, they miss the point. True seekers are not attracted to what is forbidden because it is hidden. They are drawn to it because it is true, and truth is often hidden because it is powerful. There is also responsibility. Not all are ready to receive what the forbidden reveals, because once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you awaken, you can no longer pretend to sleep. The light of real learning blinds before it illuminates. It destroys before it heals. It shatters comfort, and with it the illusions built upon it. And so many reject it not because it is false, but because it is too real. But if you are willing, if you are quiet enough to listen, still enough to receive, disciplined enough to stay, the forbidden becomes a key, not to a locked door, but to the part of you that holds the key already. When something is banned, question not only the rule, question the reason. If it threatens a structure, ask, is the structure serving truth or simply preserving control? Because sometimes what they fear you learning is that you never needed them in the first place, and that, more than anything else, is why it was forbidden. Knowledge is slow. It builds itself like a ripple on the surface of water, widening, expanding, touching further shores over time. It is cumulative, one fact after another, layered like bricks in a wall. You read, you remember, you repeat, and over time, you know. But insight is not gradual. It is not a slow accumulation. It is a sudden flash, a disruption, a crack in the wall that lets light in, all at once. Insight is lightning. It does not ask for permission. It does not grow. It strikes. It arrives when you are ready, or sometimes when you are not. Most learning systems today are built on ripples. They are designed to expand knowledge in measurable, manageable, predictable steps. This is useful. To a point. You can build a competent person this way. You can make someone functional, articulate, even impressive. But function is not the same as freedom, And competence is not the same as clarity. There was a method, a so-called hack, that changed this. It didn't feed the mind more facts. It changed how the mind saw in the first place. It didn't add more ripples to the water. It turned the surface into sky, and then struck it with lightning. What this technique offered wasn't information. It was transformation. It taught nothing and revealed everything. Because perception is the root. You can plant 1,000 seeds of knowledge, but if the soil, your perception, is dry, reactive, unprepared, nothing meaningful will grow. This method went deeper than curriculum, deeper than memory. It aimed not at the intellect, but at the lens through which the intellect operates. The world you live in is not made of what you see. It is made of how you see. And the greatest illusion is that your current lens is the only one. When that lens is shifted, truly shifted, it is not a ripple, it is a thunderclap. Suddenly what seemed complex becomes obvious. What felt chaotic reveals a pattern. What you once believed without question, you now question without fear. And that is why this method was so powerful. Because it unlocked insight, not through effort, but through alignment. Just as a storm builds quietly in the distance before lightning strikes, this practice tuned the nervous system, the breath, the awareness. It stilled the ripples, it calmed the surface, and when everything was quiet, lightning came, and with it came seeing, not hallucination, not fantasy, seeing of what is. You began to notice what you had ignored, patterns in your own thoughts, tensions in your body, inconsistencies in your beliefs. You began to see not just the world, but yourself, from outside the old lens. And in that moment, facts lost their grip, because facts belong to the ripple. But truth belongs to the lightning. Those who experienced this didn't just remember better, they remembered differently. They didn't learn faster, they unlearned deeper. They shed layers of noise, fear, and inherited thought. And what remained was a mind not filled, but freed. This is why it couldn't be allowed to spread. Because while most systems are designed to grow the ripple, this one created lightning. And lightning doesn't follow curriculum. It doesn't serve hierarchy. It doesn't ask for approval. It simply strikes. And when it does, the darkness is gone. Not because you lit a candle, but because the storm itself became your teacher. This hack didn't make people superhuman. It made them see what was already true, but long forgotten. And that, more than any textbook, any lecture, any certification, was the real revolution. To plant a tree is not to force it into the earth. You do not tear the ground in haste and throw the seed into a wound. You prepare. You soften the soil. You make space. You honor the quiet patience of growth. In the same way, the mind is not meant to be shattered open. It is not a machine to be hacked, overridden, or exploited. It is a living system, sensitive, protective, deep. When approached with care, it becomes fertile ground for understanding. But when rushed, when broken into too abruptly, the roots may never hold. There was a method, a technique, a so-called brain hack that promised growth without waiting, awakening without discipline, insight without the inner preparation to contain it. And to many it delivered, but what it delivered was too much too fast, like forcing open a bud before it's ready to bloom. Yes, it revealed the flower, but the flower soon withered. Tradition may seem slow, ceremony may feel outdated, but they were never about delay. They were about depth. They were about creating the conditions for transformation to take root, not just appear. Imagine pouring water onto hard, dry ground. It runs off the surface. It vanishes before it penetrates, but moisten the earth, sit with it, let the heat soften the crust. Then, when water is added, it enters. It stays, it nourishes. This technique, for all its brilliance, ignored the art of softening. It pierced through mental walls without asking whether the soul behind them was ready. It threw open the gates of perception without the foundation of humility, balance, or self-mastery. Sudden expansion feels like flight, but if the wings were never built, the fall is inevitable. And so, many who used this method did not grow. They flared. They ignited. Briefly, with speed, clarity, stimulation, but what flares also burns out, And when the flame is gone, what remains? Confusion, disorientation, a feeling of being cracked open with no way to close again. In ancient teachings it is said, the vessel must be cleansed before it holds the sacred. To pour pure water into a dirty bowl is to waste both. And so, the preparation was never optional, it was the teaching itself. But the modern mind has grown impatient. It seeks shortcuts. It wants the fruit without tending the root. It wants the fire without learning to carry the flame. This is why such methods became dangerous, not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well on unprepared ground. It is no surprise that the wise forbade it, because they had seen what happens when knowledge is forced before wisdom has formed. They had seen minds flooded with insight, and no container to hold it. What they knew is what nature knows: real growth is not loud. It is not instant, it is not viral, it is gradual, rooted, held in silence, nurtured in stillness. And yes, that slowness can feel like limitation, but it is the slowness of a mountain forming, of a forest maturing, of a soul remembering. So when the soil of the mind is not prepared, when the ceremonies of breath, presence, and humility are skipped, any seed, no matter how potent, will struggle to grow. It may sprout in a flash, but it will not last. You do not plant a tree by ripping open the ground. You do not awaken the mind by shocking it into brilliance. You soften, you align, you listen. And then, when the moment is right, you plant not just for speed, but for stability, not for novelty, but for nourishment. This was the lesson buried beneath the ban. It was not that the technique was evil. It was that the ground was not ready. And without readiness, even light can become a burden. The path is never promised to be open. It is not laid before you like a red carpet, inviting, effortless, adorned with signs that say, this way to truth. Often it is overgrown. It is covered in thorns, cloaked in fog, and sometimes intentionally blocked. But a blocked path does not mean wrong path. It does not mean stop. It means pause. It means consider. It means prove. In every tradition worth its salt, the gates are not wide, they are narrow. Not because they are meant to exclude, but because they are meant to measure. The warrior is not tested in comfort. The seeker is not revealed in ease. And truth, if it is real, will always challenge the one who asks for it. So when the method was banned, when the technique was silenced, hidden, denied, many turned away. They mistook the resistance as a closed door, when it was really a guardian asking, are you ready for what lies beyond? A test of worth is not about being clever. It is not about hacking, breaking, or sneaking past. It is about being seen by the obstacle and remaining still. It is about allowing the wall to reflect your own intentions back at you. Do you seek this for power, for ego, to escape your life? Or do you seek it because something within you must? Because something within you refuses to sleep one moment longer? If you are not ready, a blocked path is a blessing. It protects you from reaching what you are not yet able to carry. But if you are ready, then you will not see the block as a barrier. You will see it as a mirror. And in that reflection, you must choose. In ancient schools of inner cultivation, the student was often denied again and again, not to frustrate, but to refine, not to shut them out, but to see would they keep returning even without applause. Would they keep practicing even in silence? Would they keep walking, even when no one cleared the stones from their feet? If they did, they were no longer just seeking the path, they had become it. And so, when a powerful teaching is blocked, ask not, why are they hiding this from me? Ask instead, what am I being asked to prove? Not to them, but to myself. Because truth does not hand itself to the curious, it bows to the committed, and the gate only opens for the one who becomes the key. The banned technique, whatever it unlocked, was not placed behind a wall to protect it. It was placed behind a wall to protect you, until you had the hands to wield the key with clarity, the heart to guide its power with humility, and the discipline to walk beyond insight without turning it into arrogance. Blocked paths are the universe's way of asking, do you want this enough to change who you are for it? Not in ambition, but in essence. Will you let go of comfort? Will you abandon shortcuts? Will you stand in the dark, not knowing when the light will return, and still take a step? Because if you will, then the path is not blocked. It is simply waiting for you to become the one who is worthy to walk it. Control is loud. It shouts, commands, manipulates. It needs to be seen, reinforced, obeyed. Its power lies in holding others beneath its will. But mastery is silent. It does not need permission. It does not require followers. It does not seek to lead or dominate. It simply is. And that is what makes it so dangerous. Because once a person begins to master themselves, their mind, their habits, their attention, their emotional responses, they no longer respond to fear in the same way. They no longer seek validation from the system. They are not so easily swayed by promises or threats. They become unshakable. And in a world built on distraction, dependency, and control, a free mind is a threat. The so-called brain hack that was banned didn't promise to make people more obedient, productive, or profitable. It did something far more radical. It gave them choice. It stripped away the noise. It quieted the internal chaos. And in that stillness, people saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, what they were truly capable of. Not in the sense of external achievement, but in the quiet, enduring realization: I do not need to be ruled, not by others, not even by my own thoughts. This is not the kind of power that can be sold. It is not flashy. It is not marketable. It cannot be taxed, measured, or controlled. It does not give you control over others. It gives you command of yourself. And that is the rarest form of liberation, because once the inner chains are broken, no outer force can reattach them. You might imprison a body. You might censor speech. You might rewrite history. But you cannot recage a mind that has seen itself. You cannot silence someone who no longer fears silence. You cannot manipulate someone who sees manipulation clearly. You cannot govern someone who governs themselves with clarity, balance, and self-discipline. This is why the technique was feared, not because it turned people into rebels, but because it made rebellion unnecessary. When you know who you are, when you no longer crave approval or escape, you stop being reactive. You become sovereign, and sovereignty is contagious. It spreads not through words, but through presence. Not through conflict, but through example. One self-mastered person changes the space around them. They don't impose, they invite. They are proof that the game can be exited, that the fear can be dissolved, that the noise isn't all there is, that freedom is not something granted. It is something realized. And this is precisely what the world's controlling forces cannot allow. Because you can control people who are afraid. You can steer people who are lost. But you cannot do either when they see clearly. And this technique, this ancient, stripped back, raw method, did not make people smarter in the conventional sense. It made them see through the convention. It turned off the autopilot. It slowed the mental churn. It returned attention back to where it belongs. Here, not in the past chasing memory, not in the future chasing desire, but now. And in that now the self appears, not the identity made of roles, achievements, or wounds, but the one beneath all that, still, aware, unshaken. When someone reaches that space, they cannot be ruled from outside. And that is why this hack was not just discouraged, it was erased, not because it harmed, but because it healed too deeply. Because in a society where compliance is mistaken for peace, a truly free mind is not seen as awakened, it is seen as dangerous.